The light within the grand chancel of Cathar was a dying thing. It filtered through a kilometers-high ceiling of flawless, resonating crystal, a material that had once sung with the vibrant energies of a unified galactic network. Now it was muted, the crystal lattice deliberately dampened to reflect the somber, funereal atmosphere of the assembly. The air itself, a carefully composed mixture of inert gases and trace particulates for the various delegates, felt heavy, still, and cold. Below the crystalline canopy, seated upon thrones of polished obsidian that floated in a precise, geometric formation above a floor of captured nebulae, were the last voices of the known galaxy. They were the inheritors of empires that had measured their lifespans in epochs, civilizations that had painted constellations and sculpted worlds. And they were gathered here in this final, desperate council to preside over the end of everything. Prelate Vorlag of the Cathar, his own form a towering crystalline entity of interlocking facets and slow-pulsing internal light, felt the weariness of 1,000,000,000 years settle upon his consciousness. He was the anchor of this gathering, his species the oldest, the most stoic. His throne was at the apex of the triangular formation, and from it he observed the others. To his left, the Glypton matriarch Isix, her multifaceted carapace shifting with microscopic, agitated clicks that betrayed the calm of her hive mind's projected voice. Her species, a vast and interconnected colony, saw the coming doom as a conceptual plague, a corruption of the sacred unity of life. To his right, the shaper of eddies, a being of pure, swirling energy contained within a shimmering containment field. Illumina, a race so ancient they remembered the galaxy's birth pangs. The shaper communicated in waves of modulated light and resonant frequencies, its thoughts flowing like deep ocean currents, philosophical and detached. Representatives from a dozen other great powers were present, their forms ranging from silicon-based geology to methane-breathing leviathans, each a monument to a unique evolutionary path, and each now a portrait of dignified despair. The topic of their discussion was a void, not the simple vacuum between stars, but a hungry, creeping nullity that had appeared at the galaxy's edge and was now steadily, inexorably, consuming its way inward. It was not an armada. It did not announce itself with the roar of engines or the flash of weapons. It was a presence defined by its absolute absence. Systems that fell into its path did not explode. They vanished. One cycle, the star system of Cygnus Prime, a jewel of the Glypton hegemony, was a beacon of light and communication, home to trillions. The next, it was simply gone. No light, no gravity, no quantum signature. The space it had occupied was flat, empty, as if reality itself had been wiped clean. They had named it the Silence, for that was its only herald. A world would be chattering with data, life, and energy, and then it would fall utterly, completely silent. The data from the outer arm is conclusive, Matriarch Isix projected, her voice a dry, layered chorus that echoed in the minds of all present. The silence is not a force that can be fought. Our deepest scans show no energy, no matter, no exotic particles. It is the cessation of physics. To send a fleet against it is to send ships into nothingness. We have already lost scout flotillas that have done nothing more than confirm their own erasure. The shaper of eddies pulsed a soft, melancholic blue. It is the great unraveling, it resonated. A cosmic cycle reaches its conclusion. The thread is pulled and the tapestry comes undone. To resist is to resist entropy itself. It is the ultimate futility. Vorlag's own internal light dimmed. He had heard these arguments for cycles. He had made them himself. The Cathar, a people of logic and history, saw the equation clearly. An unstoppable force had met a galaxy of immovable objects, and the force was winning by redefining the very nature of existence. "Then we are in agreement," Vorlag stated, his own voice a series of deep, harmonic chimes that resonated through the crystal of the chancel itself. "The protocol of great seclusion is our only remaining strategy. Each empire will withdraw to its core worlds. We will raise the Chronoton fields, sever all interstellar connections, and turn our worlds into fortresses of time and space, isolated from the rest of reality. We will become islands, and pray the tide of silence recedes or passes us by." A murmur of assent, a collective sigh of resignation, flowed through the chamber. It was a strategy of cowardice, of surrender, but it was also the only logical course. To stay connected was to offer the silence a pathway. To remain open was to invite erasure. Every empire would close its doors, sealing themselves in gilded cages, hoping to outlast the storm that was devouring the sky. It was the end of the galactic community, the end of millennia of trade, diplomacy, and shared existence. A self-imposed dark age, born of a terror that transcended the fear of mere death. This was the fear of being forgotten, of having never been at all. What of the younger races? A delegate from a lesser consortium asked, its voice a liquid gurgle from its fluidic encounter suit. Those on the periphery, those not yet capable of sustaining a chronoton field. Matriarch Issex's mandibles clicked sharply, a sound of cold, hard pragmatism. They are lost, a regrettable but necessary sacrifice. Our survival, the preservation of the great civilizations, must take precedence. We cannot risk contagion by maintaining contact. The word hung in the air, contagion. It was a terrifying thought, that the silence was not just a moving void but something that could be transmitted like a disease of reality itself. No one could prove it, but no one could disprove it either, and in the absence of knowledge, fear had become the ultimate arbiter of policy. It was in this moment of grim finality that Prelate Vorlag allowed his mind to drift to a peculiar anomaly, a species so new, so loud, and so utterly insignificant in the grand cosmic scheme that they were barely a footnote in the Council's endless reports. The humans. They had appeared on the galactic stage a mere few centuries ago, a blink of an eye to the Cathar. They were chaotic, emotionally volatile, and their technology was a strange patchwork of elegant theoretical physics and brute force engineering. They had spread with a startling, almost reckless speed, settling worlds the elder races had deemed marginal. They had clamored for a seat at this very council, an absurdity that had been politely but firmly denied. They were children playing amongst titans, moments before the sky fell. The humans, Vorlag chimed, the thought surfacing into the collective consciousness of the chamber. On the Orion Spur, they remain active. Their communication networks are still fully operational. They broadcast into the void as if unaware of the danger. The shaper of eddies swirled with a flicker of what might have been amusement. They are ephemeral. Their entire history would not fill a single memory crystal of yours, Prelate. Their bravado is born of ignorance. They will be consumed, and their passing will be a whisper in a hurricane. Indeed, Issex added, they are a non-factor. Their fate is sealed, as is the fate of all who refuse to see the logic of the seclusion. We must proceed with the final activation sequence. The fields must be raised before the silence crosses the Sagittarius arm. Vorlag was about to give the final command, to utter the words that would plunge the galaxy into a self-imposed isolation, splintering the last vestiges of unity. His entire being, every facet of his logical mind, told him this was the correct path. The preservation of the Cathar race of its billion-year history was his sacred duty. Yet a dissonance echoed within him, a strange, illogical flicker of something, a sense of profound failure. They were not just retreating. They were surrendering the very idea of a future. They were accepting oblivion for the majority to grant a sliver of hope to the few. And as that thought crystallized, a new light appeared in the chancel. It was not the muted glow of the ceiling or the pulsing energy of the delegates. It was a sharp, focused beam that cut through the gloom, resolving itself into a shimmering column in the center of the chamber. A transport beam, an unauthorized one. A wave of alarm of pure shock rippled through the assembly. The chancel's security was absolute, layered with defenses that could repel a stellar flare. Nothing could get in uninvited. Nothing. The light faded, leaving a single upright figure standing on the nebula-strewn floor. It was bipedal, clad in a simple dark blue uniform devoid of ostentatious armor or energy shielding. It was soft-skinned, fragile, its form an unremarkable collection of limbs and a head covered in short, dark hair. It was a human. The sheer, impossible audacity of its presence stunned the chamber into a silence deeper than any they had yet contemplated. The guards, colossal crystalline constructs, began to move, their internal energies flaring to life. Hold, Vorlag chimed, his own shock momentarily overridden by a powerful, unexpected surge of curiosity. The human had not just breached their security, it had done so without any detectable aggression. It simply stood there, its head tilted slightly as its dark eyes scanned the assembly of gods and monsters who were deciding the fate of the galaxy. It seemed calm, unafraid. It took a slow breath of the alien atmosphere, a small, almost invisible device over its mouth shimmering as it processed the air. I am Ambassador Elias Thorne of the Sol system, the human said, its voice steady, clear, and amplified by a subtle modulation that carried it perfectly th. Roughed the vast chamber. The language was high galactic, spoken with a flawless, unaccented cadence that was itself an anomaly. I apologize for the intrusion. Your communication channels are understandably closed. I was left with no other means to address this council. Matriarch Issex's psychic projection lashed out, a wave of cold fury. You dare? You, a representative of a species of primitives, breach the most sacred chamber in this galaxy. Your vessel will be atomized, and you will be dissected to understand how this was possible. Thorn's expression did not change. He met the matriarch's psychic rage with an unnerving stillness. My vessel is of little consequence, and I am merely a messenger. I have come to offer you another choice. The shaper of eddies pulsed a slow, deep crimson, a color of profound skepticism. Choice? The universe offers no choice. There is only the coming dark and the futility of standing against it. You are a child lecturing a star on the nature of fusion. Perhaps, Thorn replied, his gaze finally settling on Prelate Vorlag. There was something in the human's eyes that Vorlag could not decipher. It was not arrogance, nor was it fear. It was a deep, quiet resolve, a focus that seemed utterly out of place with the cosmic horror they all faced. But our star taught us something different. It taught us that even in the face of inevitable entropy, a star burns. It does not hide its light. It shines, it gives warmth, and when its time comes, it seeds the darkness with the elements of new life. It fights, not by denying its end, but by asserting its existence until the very last moment. A long, heavy silence followed. The human's words were simple, almost insultingly so, a poetic platitude in the face of absolute annihilation. Yet for Vorlag, the metaphor struck a chord deep within his crystalline structure. The Cathar had not burned for a very, very long time. They had merely existed, preserved in the amber of their own history, their own logic. Your sentiment is noted, Ambassador Thorn, Vorlag chimed, his tone resonating with the full weight of his authority. But sentiment will not stop the silence. Logic dictates our course. The protocol of great seclusion is the only path to survival. Is it? The human asked softly. You will seal yourselves away for how long? A millennium, a million years, and what will you find when you emerge? A dead, empty galaxy where you are the last, lonely survivors in a cosmic graveyard. You will have survived, but you will have lost everything that made survival worthwhile. You will have preserved the body, but sacrificed the soul of the galaxy. The galaxy has no soul, Isix hissed. It is matter and energy, governed by laws we have studied for eons. You speak of mysticism and emotion, the crutches of a young and fearful species. Elias Thorn finally turned his full attention to the Glypton matriarch. On the contrary, he said, his voice lowering slightly, drawing the attention of every being in the room. We are not a fearful species. We have every reason to be. Our history is filled with self-inflicted catastrophes. We have stared into the abyss of our own making more times than we can count. We have learned that fear is a choice, not a necessity, and we have learned what is truly worth preserving. He raised his hand, and a small device on his wrist projected a holographic image into the air. It was not a weapon schematic. It was not a tactical map. It was a swirling, intricate fractal of light and data. This is a representation of what we call the human archive. It contains our entire history, our art, our music, our science, our philosophies, the genetic code of every living thing on our homeworld, the final testament of every human who has ever lived. It is everything we are. Vorlag studied the image. It was complex but primitive by Cathar standards, a simple data repository. And what is the purpose of this archive? When we first detected the silence, Thorn explained, his voice imbued with a new, somber gravity, our initial reaction was the same as yours: fear, panic, a desire to hide. Some of our people began building generational ships to flee the galaxy entirely. Others argued for a plan similar to your seclusion. But we realized the flaw in that logic. Hiding is a deferred death. Fleeing is to abandon our home, so we chose a third option. He gestured again, and the hologram expanded, showing the Orion Spur, the small arm of the galaxy where humanity resided. But now it was dotted with countless points of light, connected by shimmering lines of energy. We are not closing our doors. We are opening them wider than ever before. We are not hiding our light. We are building bonfires. Every one of those points is a beacon, a deep space transmitter broadcasting on every known frequency and some that are not. They are broadcasting everything, our history, our art, our science. We are shouting our existence into dark, defying it to erase us. We have turned our entire civilization into a message in a bottle, thrown into a cosmic ocean. The chamber was stunned. The sheer, irrational madness of the human plan was breathtaking. They were actively drawing attention to themselves. They were painting a target on their own backs. You are inviting your own destruction, Isix projected, her psychic voice laced with disbelief. You are accelerating your own extinction. Extinction is the end of a species, Thorn countered, his gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates. Annihilation is the end of its memory. We can accept the former. We will not accept the latter. We have chosen to die on our feet rather than live on our knees, entombed in a fortress of our own fear. That is the choice I have come to offer you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the ancient chamber. "You are the great civilizations. Your histories are epic poems that span the lifetime of stars. Your art is woven into the fabric of spacetime. Your knowledge could seed 1,000 new universes. To let that be extinguished in silence is the greatest tragedy I can imagine. Do not seal it away in tombs. Give it to us." Vorlag felt a tremor run through his form, a resonance of pure shock. "Give it to you? For what purpose?" "So that we can broadcast it," Thorn said simply. "We will add your histories to our own. The song of the Cathar, the unity of the Glyptons, the cosmic insight of the Lumina. We will weave it all into our final broadcast. We will become the galaxy's memory. We will shout your story into the void alongside our own. The silence may take our worlds, it may take our lives, but it will not take our legacy, not while we still draw breath." The human's proposal was so alien, so contrary to every instinct for self-preservation that had governed the elder races for eons, that it took a long time for any of them to process it. They were being offered a form of immortality, but one that required them to first accept their own mortality. They were being asked to abandon the logic of survival for the philosophy of defiance. "This is insanity," a delegate hissed from the shadows. "A sentimental gesture that accomplishes nothing." "It accomplishes everything that matters," Thorn said, his voice firm. He looked back at Vorlag, his expression one of sincere, earnest pleading. "Prelate, your people are defined by your history. You are beings of memory and legacy. What is the value of a memory that is never shared, a legacy that is locked away in the dark? The protocol of great seclusion is not preservation. It is the beginning of forgetting." Vorlag's internal light pulsed, a chaotic storm of conflicting thoughts. The human was right. The Cathar's greatest fear was not death, but oblivion. Their entire culture was a monument to what had come before. To seal that away was a betrayal of their very nature. But to entrust their entire cultural soul to a young, reckless species, a species that was actively making itself a target for the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. "Even if we agreed," Vorlag chimed slowly, testing the idea, "the transfer of such data would take decades. Time we do not have, the silence is too close." This was it, the logical flaw, the inescapable truth that would end this absurd conversation. Elias Thorn smiled, a faint, sad expression. "That is the other reason I am here. You have been studying the silence as an external phenomenon, a wave of null causality. You see it as a force of nature. We see it as an entity with a specific methodology. And because our technology developed along a different path, we have discovered something you have missed." He manipulated his wrist device again. A new hologram appeared. It was a complex, three-dimensional map of the advancing wave of the silence, but overlaid upon it were faint, shimmering patterns like ripples in a pond. "Your sensors are designed to detect matter and energy. Ours were developed to navigate the treacherous currents of quantum foam, a legacy of our early FTL experiments. We see the shadows. The silence consumes information. Not just the data in your computers, but the information inherent in matter, in the state of a quantum particle in the passage of time. And the act of consumption of erasure leaves a trace, a void echo, a scar in the informational substrate of the universe." The delegates leaned forward, their attention absolute. This was new information, impossible information. "We can track it," Thorn stated quietly. "Not just its leading edge, but its behavior. It isn't a random wave. It has patterns. It is drawn to concentrations of complex information, coherent energy, consciousness." "Which is why your broadcasting plan is suicide," Isaac snapped. "It would be," Thorn agreed, "if we were broadcasting from our home systems, but we are not. The beacons are unmanned, disposable. They are lures, but more than that, by analyzing the void echoes, we have found something else. The silence has a source, a focal point. It is not a mindless plague, it is being directed." A profound chill, colder than the vacuum of space, settled over the Grand Chancel. The silence was not a what. It was a who, or a what that was controlled by a who. This changed the equation completely. It was not entropy, it was an enemy. "Where?" Vorlag demanded, his voice a sharp, commanding chord. "Where is the source?" The holographic map zoomed out, pulling back from the galactic arm, past the glowing core, to the far side of the galaxy. A single point of darkness was highlighted. "It emanates from there. A region of space your star charts label as the anomaly of Collar. a gravitationally dead zone that no one has explored in millions of years. And what do you propose to do with this information? The shaper of eddies resonated, its form swirling with a new, intense light. Even if it has a source, it is still unstoppable. We don't intend to stop it, Thorn said. We intend to understand it, and while we do that, we will execute the second part of our plan, the preservation of your legacies. You said the data transfer would take decades. It won't. He projected another image. It was his ship, the Glimmer of Sol. It looked small, unassuming. My ship is not a warship. It is not an explorer. It is a resonant archive. Its core is a singularity, synchronized with a network of identical cores hidden in shielded subspace pockets outside the galactic plane. We call them the echo caches. Any information fed into one is instantly replicated in all the others. It is not a transfer of data. It is an imprint upon the fabric of reality itself. We can archive your entire civilization's history, down to the last recorded thought, in a matter of days. The silence that followed was absolute. The humans' revelations had come one after another, each one shattering a core assumption of the Council. They had a technology that defied known physics for data storage and transmission. They had a sensory technology that could perceive the unperceivable. And they had a philosophy that valued memory over life itself. This small, fragile-looking man did not represent a species of primitives. He represented a civilization that had stared into an abyss of its own, and had emerged with a quiet, unyielding strength that none of the ancient empires possessed. Elias Thorne stood in the center of the chamber, a lone human before the might of a dying galaxy, and made his final plea. The protocol of great seclusion is a choice to be forgotten. I am offering you a chance to be remembered, to have your song join the chorus, broadcast into the infinite, a final, defiant testament that we were here, that we lived, that we mattered. Every empire will close their doors out of fear, but I am asking you, Prelate Vorlag, to open yours out of courage. Let the Cathar be the first to choose defiance. Let your light be the one that sparks the final bonfire. Vorlag's gaze fell upon the human. This creature, whose entire species' existence was a mere rounding error in the history of the Cathar, was offering him not just a choice, but a chance at redemption. A way to lead, not by hiding, but by standing tall in the face of the ultimate darkness. The logical part of his mind screamed that it was a risk, a gamble of unprecedented scale. But another part of him, a part he had not felt stir in millennia, felt a flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. He looked at the faces of the other delegates, at the rigid fear of Isix, the philosophical resignation of the Shaper. He saw in them the same weariness he felt in himself. They were old, tired, and they had forgotten how to fight for anything more than simple existence. Perhaps this human, this Ambassador Thorne, was right. Perhaps it was time to remember. Matriarch Isix, Vorlag chimed, his voice resonating with a newfound clarity and power that cut through the gloom. You stated that sending a fleet against the Silence is futile. You are correct. A war of weapons cannot be won. The human proposes a different kind of war, a war of memory, a war of legacy. He turned his full attention to Elias Thorne. You ask for our history, our soul. You ask us to entrust the sum total of our existence to your echo caches, and in return you offer only the promise of remembrance. It is the only promise that has ever truly mattered, Thorne replied softly. Vorlag's internal light flared, no longer muted and dying, but bright and clear as a newborn star. He had made his decision. The cold, hard logic of survival had failed them. It had led them only to this tomb of a chamber, to this pact of fear. It was time for a new logic, the logic of defiance. Then the Cathar will not be forgotten, Prelate Vorlag declared, his voice ringing through the grand chancel, each chime a hammer blow against the despair that had filled it for so long. We will not hide in the dark. Ambassador Thorne, you will have our archives, you will have our song. The doors of the Cathar Empire will not close, they will open, and our light, joined with yours, will burn. A wave of shock and disbelief washed over the delegates. The Cathar, the most conservative, the most rigid of all the elder races, had just shattered the consensus. Matriarch Isix's carapace clicked in frantic protest, but Vorlag ignored her. He had made his choice. Against all odds, against all logic, he had chosen to place his faith in the small, soft-skinned creature from a forgotten arm of the galaxy. He had chosen to fight. The days that followed were a blur of frantic, purposeful activity, a stark contrast to the stagnant despair that had preceded them. The Grand Chancel was transformed from a mausoleum into a command center. The Glimmer of Sol remained in orbit, a tiny speck against the crystalline grandeur of the Cathar homeworld, but its presence was the fulcrum upon which the galaxy's fate now turned. Elias Thorne did not remain on his ship. He stood beside Prelate Vorlag's throne, a calm, steady presence amidst a storm of data and diplomacy. He was no longer just an ambassador. He had become the architect of the galaxy's final act. The process of archiving the Cathar civilization was a sight of breathtaking beauty. Beams of pure information, visible as shimmering auroras of light, flowed from the planet's central data cores, converging on the human vessel. The ship's singularity core drank it all, absorbing a billion years of history, science, and art without strain. The sheer volume of data would have overloaded any other system in the galaxy, but the human technology accepted it as easily as a river accepts the rain. Vorlag watched the streams of light, feeling not a sense of loss, but of liberation. Each particle of data sent was an act of defiance. It was a declaration that the Cathar would not vanish quietly. The other empires watched, at first with skepticism, then with a growing sense of wonder and envy. The Cathar's decision had sent a shockwave through the galactic political landscape. If the oldest and most logical race had abandoned the seclusion, what did that mean for the others? Thorne did not pressure them. He did not cajole or threaten. He simply let Vorlag's example speak for itself. He and the prelate opened a channel to the other empires not to debate, but to show them what was happening. They broadcast images of the data transfer, of Cathar and human technicians working side by side, a fusion of ancient crystal and young, soft flesh. It was the Glyptons who broke next. Matriarch Isix, ever the pragmatist, saw the logic in the new equation. If oblivion was certain, then a guaranteed legacy was a better outcome than a potential, but unlikely, survival in isolation. Her people's strength was the collective, the hive mind. The thought of that vast, interconnected consciousness simply ceasing to exist with no record was anathema. She contacted Vorlag, her psychic voice stripped of its earlier hostility, replaced with a grudging respect. The Glypton hegemony would join the Archives project. Their data streams, thick and complex as woven silk, soon joined the Cathars, flowing towards the lone human ship. One by one, the others followed. The Lumina, the methane-breathing leviathans, the silicon lifeforms. Fear gave way to a somber, determined unity. The great seclusion was dead. In its place was born the great remembrance. Fleets that were once poised to guard sealed borders were redeployed, forming protective cordons around the core worlds, not to fight the silence, but to protect the final, desperate act of data preservation. The entire galaxy had mobilized, not for a war of destruction, but for a war of creation, the creation of the most complete library in the history of the universe. Throughout it all, Elias Thorne remained the comm center. He coordinated the massive logistical undertaking with an efficiency that astounded the elder races. His team, a small handful of humans aboard the Glimmer of Sol, worked tirelessly, their communications with him always brief, professional, and calm. They were a species that seemed to thrive in crisis, to find their purpose at the edge of the abyss. Vorlag found himself studying the ambassador, trying to understand the source of his strength. "Why are you doing this, Thorne?" Vorlag asked one cycle, as they stood together on an observation deck overlooking the capital city, its crystalline spires now pulsing with the light of the data transfer. "Your species could have taken your archiving technology and fled, gone to another galaxy, saved yourselves. Why stay here and risk everything for us?" Thorne's gaze was distant, fixed on the stardusted sky where the invisible line of the silence was drawing ever closer. "Because a long time ago on a small, damaged world, we learned that a universe without neighbors is just a bigger cage. We almost lost our owl. And history once to fire and flood in our own foolishness. We had to piece it back together from fragments, from whispers. The experience taught us that memory is the most sacred thing we possess. Not just our own, but everyone's. To run would be to leave a library to burn. We are not just saving your memories. We are saving the idea that memories are worth saving." His answer was simple, yet it struck Vorlag with the force of a physical blow. The Cathar had always seen their history as a possession, a treasure to be guarded. The humans saw all history as a shared heritage, a universal truth. It was a profound, fundamental difference in perspective. As the final archives from the last of the great empires were being ingested by the Glimmer of Sol, the human censor team sent a priority message to Thorne. He projected the image for Vorlag and the other delegates, now linked in a constant stream of communication. The void echo map. The ripples emanating from the anomaly of color had changed. They were no longer steady. They were pulsing, intensifying. The silence was accelerating. "It knows," Isix projected, a fresh wave of fear in her voice. "It knows what we are doing. It is coming for us." It is not coming for us, Thorn corrected gently. It is coming for the data for the ship. He looked at Vorlag. It is time. We have everything we could get. The archive is as complete as it will ever be. What is your course of action? Vorlag asked, his own form tense. The beacons on the periphery are still broadcasting our old public archives. They will serve as a distraction for a time. But the silence is not a fool. It will track the source of the new, concentrated information. It will come for the glimmer of Saul, Thorn explained. I must take the ship and draw it away. Lead it on a chase across the galaxy, buying you as much time as possible. It was a suicide mission. The human was proposing to make himself and his crew the ultimate lure, to pilot a vessel containing the collected soul of the galaxy directly into the path of the entity that consumed souls. No, Vorlag stated firmly. You will not go alone. The Cathar fleet will escort you. The combined fleets will escort you. We will not let our legacy be carried into the dark by one ship. We chose to fight, and we will fight to the end. For the first time since he had arrived, Elias Thorn looked genuinely surprised. He looked at the faces and forms of the delegates, at the hard light in Vorlag's crystalline form, the determined set of Issex's mandibles, the focused energy of the Shaper. They were no longer cowering. They were united, ready to face their end with a courage he had only hoped to inspire. Very well, Thorn said, a ghost of a proud smile on his face. Then we will face the dark together. A fleet of impossible scale assembled in the void. Warships of crystal, chitin, and pure energy, vessels that had not flown in concert for millennia, now formed a great, silent armada around the tiny human ship. It was the most powerful military force ever gathered, and they all knew it was likely useless against their foe. Their purpose was not to destroy the silence, but to defend the glimmer of Saul. To buy it seconds, minutes, hours, to die in defense of an idea. They moved as one, a river of steel and light, heading towards the anomaly of Collar. Thorn's sensor data guided them, showing them the path of the void echoes. They were not just running, they were heading towards the source. A desperate, final gamble to confront the enemy on their own terms. As they crossed the galactic core, the void echoes became a roaring tide. The fabric of spacetime ahead of them grew thin, warped. The silence was close. Sensors on the outer ships began to fail, their data streams winking out one by one as they were touched by the edge of the void. There were no explosions, no screams, just a quiet, steady erasure. On the bridge of the Cathar command vessel, Vorlag stood beside a holographic projection of Thorn. It's faster than we anticipated, the human said, his voice as calm as ever. It's adapting. We will hold the line, Vorlag chimed. Then something new happened. The sensors on the glimmer of Saul, the ones that tracked the void echoes, registered a massive, focused spike of energy from the heart of the anomaly. It was not a void echo. It was the opposite. It was a signal, coherent, structured, and impossibly powerful. What is that? Vorlag demanded. Thorn's eyes were wide, fixed on his console. I don't know. It's not an attack. It's a communication. It's resonating with the archive, with the data we've collected. It's responding. Before anyone could process the information, the signal hit them. It was not a wave of energy that damaged their ships, but a wave of pure information that washed over the consciousness of every living being in the fleet. It was a torrent of images, sounds, and concepts, a message on a scale no one had ever conceived. Ed. They saw the birth of the galaxy. They saw the rise and fall of countless species, civilizations so ancient that the Cathar were but infants in comparison. They saw these civilizations face their own ends, their own entropies, and they saw them make a choice. Not to hide, not to die, but to preserve themselves. To transform their entire existence, their matter, their energy, their consciousness into pure information. And they saw the builders, beings of unimaginable scale who had created the anomaly of Collar. It was not a dead zone. It was a megastructure, a cosmic hard drive. The silence was not an enemy. It was not a weapon. It was a collection tool. A gentle, inexorable harvester designed to gather the stories of civilizations that had reached their final chapter. It didn't destroy information, it absorbed it, preserved it, uploaded it into the great structure. The final part of the message was an image, an invitation. The great megastructure, a dark sphere against the stars, opened. Not a physical door, but a gateway in spacetime. The message was clear. The harvest was complete. The archive that the humans had built, this frantic, desperate effort to save the galaxy's memory, had been the final missing piece. It had proven to the collectors that this cycle of the galaxy was worthy, that it had understood the importance of legacy. And now, those who had been brave enough not to hide, those who had faced the end with open eyes, were being invited to the next stage. An invitation to step through the gate, to join the collective of civilizations, to transcend. Vorlag stood in stunned silence, the message echoing in his crystalline mind. Everything they had feared, everything they had fought against, was a misunderstanding of cosmic proportions. The silence was not an end. It was a beginning. He looked at the projection of Elias Thorne. The human was pale, his expression one of profound, soul-shaking awe. He had come to them as a messenger of defiance, prepared to lead them in a glorious, tragic end. Instead, he had become a prophet of transcendence. He, the representative of the youngest race, had understood the truth of the universe better than the oldest. Every empire was ready to close their doors, Vorlag chimed softly, the words resonating with a meaning that was now infinitely deeper than before. To lock themselves away from what they thought was the end. But you, against all odds, you chose to fight for us. You fought for our memories, and in doing so you have opened a door we never knew existed. Thorne finally looked up from his console, his eyes meeting Vorlag's projection. It seems, he said, his voice filled with a quiet wonder, that the best way to save a story is to become part of a much larger one. The great fleet hung in the silent void, no longer an army but a congregation of pilgrims. Ahead of them, the anomaly of color pulsed with a soft, welcoming light. The choice was no longer about how to die, but about how to live on a scale they had never imagined. The journey was not over. A new one, beyond the confines of their galaxy, beyond their understanding of existence, was about to begin. And it had all started because one species, born in a cradle of chaos and fire, had decided that some things were more important than survival, and that a shared memory was the most precious thing in the universe.